GGA regards good governance as imperative and urgent for Africa, which is why we seek to establish facts related to governance, good or bad, because they matter and are of value for building societies, nations, and communities whose governments are effective in implementing initiatives for the improvement of people's lives. Because it's the promise offered by the concept of governance that inspires people to believe, but its failures or shortcomings are what lead to frustration, despair, and dissatisfaction. GGA is located across the African continent, and our facts are obtained through on-the-ground involvement by our people in programs, which are a key aspect of our commitment to actually make a difference. And through data and statistics gathered from reputable researchers and organizations around the world. We put these through a process of rigorous and empirical analysis to reveal the facts of the matter, articulated through our publications, comprising together a reliable resource of fact-based findings accessible for use through various platforms by individuals, organizations, or others like-minded in terms of our belief in the value and integrity of facts. Talk to us. Work with us, because GGA has much to offer to those who seek to inspire, drive, and accelerate good governance across the continent. And that's the key to realizing the possibilities we all believe in for Africa. It's a matter of fact.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Our sincere apologies for the technical difficulties that we were having. We trust that those have been resolved and that you will stay with us for the duration of what promises to be a very dynamic and engaging event this afternoon. So welcome on that note to our third webinar in the Good Governance Africa Zambia Dialogue series in partnership with the Mail and Guardian. Our topic this afternoon is a strategy to future-proof Zambia. Zambia's president, Hakainde Hichilema, achieved a historic electoral victory in August last year, having lost 5 previous elections. Hichilema won on his 6th attempt, showing tremendous grit. His victory occurred despite former President Lungu's attempts at rigging and repression. Today's panel discussion is a continuation of last year's engagement where we took stock of the first 100 days of Hichilema's performance in office and explored how best to address the socio-economic development challenges facing the country, many of which had been inherited by the new administration. So since August last year, Hichilema has obviously faced a range of economic, social, and political challenges that are now predicted to potentially hold the country back from achieving its development goals. Hichilema's assumption of Zambia's highest office and his government securing a deal with the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, appear to have helped increase investor confidence in Zambia. This has occurred against the backdrop of growing global demand for copper, which presents some opportunities for the country because of copper's importance in the energy transition towards a net zero future. There are also very few available substitutes for copper, and thus Zambia's prospects appear promising. Zambia is Africa's 2nd largest copper producer, second to the DRC, that is, with the potential capacity to produce over 1 million tons a year, although many surface level ore bodies are being depleted. If Zambia's development is to be safeguarded, however, it cannot be a business as usual approach with mere piecemeal reforms. It is our contention at GGA that the country urgently needs a major economic shift to ensure that it can successfully master the structural and policy challenges that threaten its progress. Several key challenges on the country's road to recovery have been highlighted by GGA, and these demand urgent interventions. Now, over the last year, our work has sought to understand the key issues at stake when it comes to Zambia. This has involved analyses of debt restructuring options through structural reform programs such as that offered by the IMF, and the significant role of copper in the global energy transition. This work has been carried out by our Natural Resource Governance Program, and I'm very pleased to announce that our researcher in that program, Vincent Obisi-Orlu, will be joining us on the panel. And then in the lead up to the August 2021 national elections last year, our governance delivery and provided extensive coverage on the pre-election period challenges, compelling developments, among many others. In today's conversation, we examine the progress made by President Hichilema and his administration on some of the policy and political challenges that hinder higher performing Zambia. Now, some of the issues and questions that we aim to address today include the following. First, what kind of policies are optimal to address Zambia's debt problems? Dr. Grief Chalwa, who joined us last year and unfortunately couldn't make it today, emphasized that policies are a choice. They're not a science. Every policy is a choice with various knock-on effects and trade-offs. So what are the optimal policies to address Zambia's debt problems? Second, what reforms country's current mineral tax regime and mining license application processes to optimize exploration and productive investment, both in mining and smelting of copper, but also in respect of other minerals and metals such as cobalt, also increasingly in demand to fuel the energy transition. And then thirdly, what are the key challenges and opportunities presented by the ongoing demand for copper and cobalt? And how can these contribute to growing and diversifying Zambia's economy to the benefit of its population rather than an elite few? Then fourthly, what elements of the global copper and cobalt value chains could Zambia feasibly tap into? In other words, how do we move from Zambia being a mere commodity exporter to being an exporter of higher value add products? And then last but not least, and certainly not limited to this, our fifth question is what exactly are the Hichilema administration's policy goals and objectives? Will they create broad-based development and benefit ordinary Zambian citizens, which ultimately is our objective at Good Governance Africa? We hope to see policies implemented that create a corridor in which economic dynamism can flourish and citizens can benefit and the country thrive. As a key part of our Zambia Dialogue series, we are honored and privileged today to welcome 4 interlocutors to join us to shed light on the questions that I've just posed. In this order, we have Ms. Laura Miti, who joined us last year as well. Laura is the Executive Director for the Alliance for Community Action. So we look forward to hearing an on-the-ground perspective from ordinary Zambians from Ms. Miti. Second, we're joined by Boniface Chembe, who is the Executive Director of the Southern African Centre for the Constructive Resolution of Disputes, also known as SACORD. And then we're joined by Dr. Dale Mudenda, who is an economics lecturer at the University of Zambia. And finally, Vincent Obisi-Orlu, who I mentioned earlier, will be joining us as well. He is a researcher in our Natural Resource Governance Program, and he has actually just completed a policy briefing on this very topic of how to future-proof Zambia. And we look forward to releasing that shortly. Now, it's my privilege to invite each of our speakers to provide an initial 5-minute intervention on the topics that I've raised. And thereafter, we'll move into a vibrant panel discussion in which I'll be asking questions of the speakers. and taking questions from the audience. So please do start thinking about your questions even now. And without further delay, let me hand over to Ms. Laura Meaty. Laura, my apologies. It looks like you're still muted.
So thank you very much, Ross, and thank you for having me back on the webinar. So I'll start by saying that so the major topic today, which is more about the economy of Zambia and copper and that kind of, I have no expertise on it, so I'm a bit of an imposter. But what I'll give you is the context, look a little bit at the context in Zambia in which all these are being discussed, and what is how it looks since the elections last year. We're good more than half a year, towards 9 months since elections happened. So what I would say is that a major shift in the context and in the environment in the country is that the democratic, the governance questions that exercise minds and seem to just dominate the context in the last 7 years seem to have taken a back step. And that's not to say they've been resolved. We still have quite a few questions. For example, civil society is a bit worried at the speed or should I say the delay in bringing certain legislation to Parliament, which would concretize our democracy. So there's of course the issues of the Public Order Act, which was a big problem in the last period. There is the Constitution, and there's access to information, as well as amendment of the cybersecurity law. I mean, at least talking from the perspective of the ACA, those are huge. However, these conversations don't seem to produce the kind of absolute tensions that they did, and also that fear of a democracy backsliding in long strides has kind of dissipated. We also, of course, have the major change that there is a sense of, should I call it, I don't know whether it's peace or lack of tension, because largely of the removal of cadres. So cadres were a big issue in the last years. You had fear across the board. You had fear whether you were holding a workshop in a hotel, the cadres could walk in. You had fear in the markets across board. And I think, as has been suggested by many people, that is the main reason that the PF lost, because of the violence. So generally, I think on the governance question, there's issues to be resolved, but they are not what are exercising minds. I would say the major issue now is the economy. So it's the state of the economy that has not improved. And I would say there's a sense of impatience among citizens who, in a way, it seems expected the new government to come with a magic wand in which there would be jobs, prices go down and everything. And that, of course, has not happened. The prices have gone high. You have fuel that has gone high. Of course, with the reduction this month, we are having fuel prices adjusted month on month, rather than over longer periods like we had. But I would say that unemployment, poverty, and just hunger are the main issues in Zambia right now. I've said many times that I think our poverty in Zambia is food determined, unlike many other countries. So even if you do hold a steady job, a large part of your income goes towards food. So if you don't work, the levels of hunger in homes are very high. That, of course, then has a knock-on effect on issues like crime and just the sense, I suppose, of satisfaction with the government by ordinary citizens. All of this is underpinned, of course, by the huge debt question. the huge debt mountain that was inherited by the new government. It is one that has needed to be dismantled. So we have issues of IMF. Are we going to get the IMF bailout? The fear that you might feel China might not come on board, which seems to have been addressed in the last few weeks. Because of that debt burden, the direction that the government seems to be taking, which seems to be towards, should I say, alleviating the suffering of ordinary citizens. I would say that sounds to be the overall objective of the HH presidency. So he speaks a lot about service delivery, he speaks about education, he speaks about jobs, but these are not magical. You need money. You need money in the treasury. You need the economy to improve, and that is not happening at the same time. And so the question is, where do we go from now? How does the economy improve in such a way that the articulated objectives of the government are met? So I suppose I'd say the difference between this government and the last one is that if you were to ask anyone what the president wants or what he wants, but I think especially the president, quite apart from his party, he seems to have a very, very social objectives. He wants those at the bottom to enjoy what he calls the dividends of democracy. That, though, can be said, but how does this then translate into everyday life? And so the question is, how patient will citizens be? How will government be able to explain to them the steps that it is taking? I think I've said before that this is a government that's very poor at communication. I mean, amazingly poor at communicating, even what it has done well. So yes, a few jobs have in government and that kind of thing, but it just, if only those could be heard. But right now, what you hear mostly are the negatives, pushed mostly by detractors of the government, on opposition people, but also just people on the street. I am hungry. That's the whole point. They don't need any figures being thrown at them. They are hungry. So I think I'll end it there and say the major issue right now in the country is yes, the economy linked to debt, and how we turn that around from the resources that we have, and as well as hopefully a restructuring that removes the stronghold of debt around our throats. Thank you very much.
Ms. Laura Miti, absolutely brilliant intervention there. Thank you very much for kicking us off. Certainly no imposter, and at the end of the day, economists use plenty of jargon, but the bottom line is that inflation, hunger, poverty, these are things that should exercise not only economists, but all of us who have an interest in ensuring Zambia's future. Very insightful comments there. Many thanks. So on that note, I'd like to hand over, please, to Mr. Boniface Jembe for your initial intervention. Please, sir.
Thank you so very much, Ross. Good afternoon to you and everyone who is following this program. Thank you once again for extending an invitation for us to come and partake in this very important discussion. And in so doing, allow me to contextualize the whole discussion in terms of where we are. And really, where is the current government trying to take this country? The last debt profile of Zambia stood at 32 billion United States dollars. And the debt has been a very big issue for this country. And from the very onset, the government has given a proposal of how to attend to this debt issue, more specifically, secure an IMF International Monetary Fund bailout package. And from their vantage point, the IMF package would address two key issues. Number one, attend to issues of the restructuring of the debt, engaging with creditors and ensuring that as much as possible, there are low interest rates that are given to Zambia to be able to service that particular debt. Number two, ensure that once the IMF package is secured, make sure it goes towards the balance of payments or addressing budget deficits that the country has been experiencing, and by so doing, attend to some of the structural difficulties that Zambia's economy has been going through. Now, there has been two schools of thoughts on the government's vision in terms of addressing the debt issue, more specifically by focusing much more aggressively on going to the International Monetary Fund. Many stakeholders believe that there are many local solutions to Zambia's debt. Suffice to say that even when they do put forward the issue of local solutions to Zambia's debt, they are not very clear in terms of the actual solutions. What kind or what ways and means would we be able to address the debt through our local solutions? So the government has not done a very good job, just like my colleague Laura explained. Really, why must we focus on the IMF as a way of restructuring our debt? This is worsened by the fact that, yes, we continue to have problems of unemployment, problems of poverty, problems of general social inequality. The rich are getting richer whilst the poor are getting poorer. And even when you look at some of the action that the government has taken at a local level, for example, the banning of cadres in local markets, bus stations, and general public goods, it has not translated in the realization of resources that initially was thought to be the case. A day or two ago, the chairperson of the Local Government Commission for this country came out and lamented the fact that even after cadres were banned from bus stations and markets and so on and so forth, councils have failed to realize the right revenue from the collection of fees from these public goods. In other words, there has been a very limited amount of success in realizing the necessary resources that are needed by these local councils so that this could be channeled further into improved service delivery, which is what the UPND government is trying to do by all means through policy formulation and implementation, for example, of an increased allocation towards one of the most decentralized forms of finances or resources in this country, namely the Constituency Development Fund. So there is need to ensure that there is maximum realization of resources from various policy undertakings, but this has so far not started materializing. This has been worsened or compounded by the fact that we now have other global problems or issues that have exacerbated or worsened the situation that the government is trying to address. The Russia-Ukraine war has contributed to the continued hike in basic foodstuffs and commodity prices in the country. Fuel is on the rise, foodstuffs are on the rise, and this has made life a little bit more difficult for the country. So there is need for the government, of course, to continue implementing their policy direction in terms of the IMF, in terms of the Constituency Development Fund, in terms of banning cadres from markets and bus stations and so on and so forth. But the results have to start showing very quickly because it is true that the hunger that is on the streets on an average Zambian is making people a little impatient, and that impatience requires a lot of communication. So the president has to be helped much more aggressively by his team to engage constructively with the people of Zambia, explain some of the successes, whether big or small, in terms of what they are implementing, and ensure that they carry the rest of the population with them. Anything short of that will continue to worsen the situation. Otherwise, I couldn't agree more with what my colleague has said. The biggest issue is the economy. And as the Americans, I would say, is the economy stupid?
Wonderful, Chairman. Thank you very, very much for those insightful comments. Indeed, it's the economy stupid, and certainly it does seem as if communication is key, but even communication cannot feed the hungry. And so on that note, we have this particular challenge of knowing how to both address debt in the hope that that will bring in the required investment to kickstart the economy, but long-term strategies, as Keynes said, we're all dead in the long run. So on that note, I'd like to hand over to my colleague Vincent Orlu. Unfortunately, we've lost Dr. Dale Mudenda to connectivity problems, but Vincent, over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Ross. So firstly, I think that to start off, I must say that the current energy transition that the world is confronted with, the move towards a low-carbon future, opens a number of opportunities for Zambia. First being in the fact that it is highly unlikely that the price of copper is going to suddenly crater and crash. This is not to say that there will not be fluctuations in the price of copper. However, this gives an opportunity for the government to have the confidence to make longer-term policies based on where and how the price of copper is, right? I don't see tomorrow the price of copper crashing like it did in the 2008. I don't think that's feasible due to the amount of investment and focus from numerous countries on the energy transition. And as Ross said initially, copper is essential to the energy transition. Now, copper is also going to form, or in my view, forms a key part in how Zambia moves towards not only debt sustainability, but also a more sustainable economy and a more sustainable future. Yes, the people are going to be upset, are currently upset about the fact that they're not experiencing the benefits of these spikes in the price of copper. And this is going to be something that can be experienced and enjoyed in the longer run. This is going to require the government to act and engage in certain policies. The first of which is that the government will need to use this current moment of copper price boom to stabilize the copper mining sector first. Second, this includes the stabilization of an effective mine taxation mine taxation approach. This needs to be something that's robust and does not require the government to be changing and fiddling with it whenever there's a spike or a drop in the copper price. This has been a problem that Zambia has faced in the past. What has been termed the unstable copper taxation and mineral taxation regimes of Zambia. Second, Zambia will need to expand its economy and its economic focus in terms of going beyond copper, just copper. Now, Zambia occupies a very fantastic position. To the north is the DRC with cobalt and a number of minerals that are critical for the energy transition. To the south is Zimbabwe, which is going to be, as things move forward, a major exporter and producer of lithium. Zambia has the opportunity to leverage its education system, its stability, and develop industries around the energy transition, right? To now move into development of your lithium batteries, say, because of where it belongs. Zambia can use the current Russia-Ukraine war and the fact that there's currently a shortage in global supply in some of these things, and supplying and be a place to put things together. Yes, this will require processes from the government how the government will approach it. And I think that one of the key factors that's going to be essential is environmental social governance, ESG, in the allocation, how the country manages the copper economy, but also in terms of how the government will manage the development of these new future industries. Thank you.
Excellent, Vincent. Well done, shining the GGA star there. And indeed such an interesting proposition that Zambia can leverage its geographic position to build industries that connect mining to industrial opportunities in the global supply chains associated with the green revolution, especially in the realm of transport and energy. But coming back to the question of immediate economic difficulties and Zambia's debt problem, and perhaps how best to address that and communicate on that, I'm pleased to see that Dr. Dale Mudende is back with us. Dr. Mudende, if I could hand over to you now, that would be fantastic. Many thanks.
Sorry, Dr. Mudende, you're on mute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, you're with us. Fantastic. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. Apologies for the poor internet connectivity on my end. And I think I missed the first two questions that you asked, but I got the second two questions. But maybe as part and parcel of my presentation, I'll just first maybe put the basis and the where we are coming from really. If you observe going back to way back to say 2011, 2010, up to say 2021 after the elections, before the elections, we had a very good sort of like policy dimension, but unfortunately, the policy itself was not really consistent in most of the areas. And like everybody else has already said on the webinar, we experienced quite huge and chaotic policy reforms that were taking place, especially in the mines. And what was also happening in the mines was government direct intervention in some of the key mining institutions. Ultimately, what happened in the mining sector was that the policy uncertainties led to a decline in terms of exploratory investment, as well as direct investment in the mining industry. Ultimately, we had a slowdown in terms of volumes of copper exports, and we could not really expand to largely despite sometimes having good international prices. So with that chaotic environment in terms of the mining sector, we also experienced some sort of chaotic policy responses to some of the problems that we are having, which were all focused more on borrowing to invest in infrastructure, sometimes not so strategically as to what kind of infrastructure we're investing in. Ultimately, we ended up in huge deficits that were driven by both external debt and the domestic debt. The country with those kinds of debts could not pay its debts. And like Rola and Chembe have already said, then we have all this huge population that is unemployed. And for those that are employed, are really underemployed. And within that context that we are having as unemployed and the underemployed, the prices were actually rising, which meant that the cost of living was going up. And out of that dissatisfaction that was taking place within the populace, definitely went into a policy change in terms of our selection of government. We went on to a new government. Now, what has the new government brought in, and what do I think is something that we could leverage on? One, the idea was to bring in a government that would have possibly some form of policy that would respond to the both immediate and long-term needs of the country in terms of course, resolving the cost of living, as well as stabilizing the prices, generally stabilizing the prices, trying to leverage on its confidence to bring about investment in the country. And what I've seen so far, really the reforms that are supposed to be implemented and the policy direction of stabilizing the economy has been quite straightforward and has been articulated very well by the Minister of Finance, by the central bank, and by the definitely the government itself. And what we have seen is that surprising enough, even to me as an economist, has been the fact that inflation has reduced actually from almost double digits in the last 6 months to from about 18 or so. It has come down to about 11.4% now, and we are moving towards the stabilization of these prices. But what we still have is this huge debt burden, of which indeed, like Rola and Boniface have indicated, has remained the major monster in the economy as to how we resolve it and how then we create a stable macroeconomic environment that can be conducive for private sector investment, as well as indeed improve the general living conditions of the people. So what we have seen is, of course, people talking about IMF solution and the government and the local solution. I personally, as an economist, I do not believe there's a local solution or indeed an IMF solution, because the IMF solution is hinged on the advice of what the local economists are saying and what has been debated in the policy cycles within the country. And definitely, there will be no other way other than paying the debt. And we have to pay this debt in a manner that does not dent our economy too badly. Because currently, if we were to go into debt servicing at the rate that we are supposed to be going on, we'll be talking about 70% of the exports value going to debt servicing. And that would leave the economy in almost a crippled environment. So debt restructuring is critical, and definitely we need the IMF to come on board to both not only sort out the debt problem, but also to anchor the confidence of the markets in terms of our commitment to the policy reforms and investments that will bring long-term growth in the country. With regards to the new dimensions in terms of industrialization, yes, the copper value chains are critical to Zambia's economic growth in the medium and long term. And we have to leverage on the global value chains that are taking place in the electric car making, the batteries, and so forth. But critical also is to take into advantage what so far we've seen as government's direction in trying to promote improved productivity in the mining, in the agriculture sector. We happen to have a huge market within our neighboring countries, like Congo DR, like Angola, which really are yearning for Zambian exports in the production of food and all these products. So what is really required, the government is trying to do, is to, in the last budget, for example, they went ahead and lowered the cost of importing capital equipment for agriculture sector. And we hope that the policies will become much more straightforward and more elaborate, and also well communicated to the podcast so that we can start to appreciate what is going on as a country. But overall, I think there is shake in the fact that the binding constant has been the debt. And despite that binding constant on the debt, to try and address the problems of unemployment as well as possibly low income levels, government has tried to decentralize the fiscal regime by taking more money to communities so that if they are able to participate in government projects and local activities, then possibly the incomes will improve. But overall, I think there's need to really articulate the policy direction in a much more stronger way, as well as trying to give confidence to the Zambian people so that they can own the reforms and see that the long-term solutions as well as the medium-term solutions lie in our commitment to implementing the policies that resolve the monsters that we have as a country. With these few remarks, I would like to say thank you very much for inviting me and for participating in this webinar. Thank you.
Dr. Modenda, terrific contribution there from you. Thank you very, very much. Interestingly enough, your colleague, Dr. Chalwa, who couldn't join us today, probably has a slightly different view on the IMF. However, one of the points you raised that was critical, and I'd like to open up to all the panelists now, is that the thinking behind an IMF deal very much appears to be that it is a debt payment solution on the back of reforms that are meant to attract foreign direct investment and local investments in order to help diversify the economy and so create job opportunities through that mechanism. One of the major concerns, of course, is that an IMF deal in and of itself may actually drive up prices of critical goods such as electricity and food. If, for instance, IMF orthodoxy holds and we are not allowed to impose price ceilings on certain products. That seems to be a major concern, yet at the same time, as you rightly say, the debt has to be paid because current debt payments seem to be coming at the cost of of Zambia's opportunities for diversification. Moreover, those who argue that Zambia should spend its way out of economic difficulty perhaps underestimate that strategy could lead to further debt, especially if it fails to propel growth. But of course, in the midst of this conversation at a relatively high level about IMF restructuring and so forth, the question still remains, how do we deal with the everyday hunger and inflation of 11% that you mentioned and that Laura emphasized earlier? And how should the government be communicating about its plan to resolve hunger, but also the debt, and to also diversify the economy? Ms. Miti, perhaps I could hand back to you and just hone in on this issue of day-to-day hunger. Also, given that Zambia has had a relatively good harvest, which raises a question of why food security is still so limited, given Zambia's agricultural prowess. Of course, notwithstanding that, as Dr. Mudenda said, there's serious room for improvement on that front. Dr. Ms. Miti.
So, speaking as a non-agriculturalist, one thing that's very shocking about Zambia is that there's this level of
Laura, sorry, it looks as if you've been muted.
Okay, so one thing that's shocking about Zambia is the level of hunger. So we are a fertile country. We have lots of water. And I think generally on any given day, like if you're driving through our markets, so we have open air markets, kind of unstructured. The amount of food you see there that is going to go to waste is enough to feed everybody in the country. So I think some of the policies that we need are, first of all, it's just simple. Maybe even roads, getting food from one area to another, and also becoming less maize-centric. So our farming is so maize-centric that everyone believes they must, one, grow maize, but secondly, we've had what is FISIP, which is farming support, FISIP, which is a farming support process. So farmers will get support to grow maize mostly. So it's fertilizer for maize. While as a rule, this country can grow all manner of food, and export it to the region. So one thing you've heard the president say is that we're going to move away from maize support to overall farming as farming support. We have simple problems like what can I say? Preserving food, storing food. So on every farming season, we lose tons and tons of food simply because we cannot store it. So if you start at the local level, even just within the subsistence farming, one of the things that we've talked about a lot as ACA is the question of what are called feeder roads. I was speaking earlier on about how we've prioritized roads that go nowhere. Especially in the last government, we're tarring roads that went to cadres' houses, to ministers' houses, used billions of kwacha of debt money to decorate Lusaka, essentially. Closes. Meanwhile, feeder roads. These are the roads from a village to a trunk road that might be just 40 kilometers. Someone cannot, half the year, you cannot navigate that road. You can't drive down that road. Or it will take you 3, 4 hours, 5 hours for what should be a 45-minute trip. So these things seem very basic, but looking at it from us as the ACA, when you go down into the villages and you're listening to people, is to get people eating, just having the food on their table, which is a basic meal of shima and beans, shima and rape. What are needed are not even high-level economic changes, but it is simple changes that allow people, one, to eat themselves, two, to sell their excess food to other parts of the country, and to be able to get on with life like that. So as it is, yes, our prices are very high because we are depending on imports at a time when we shouldn't be depending on imports. So what I think what I would say is you would hope that you have a government that looks at what matters to the majority people, and the majority people just need really, really simple food, which is already grown in the country, or to be helped to diversify their crops. Forget diversify the economy, is to diversify their crops and be able to take, there's excess rice in the west of Zambia, and yet a few kilometers down to Livingstone, which is not very far, you will find that same rice very expensive because it just cannot get there. So if you could connect, I always say, if you could connect people across the country, not even talking about exports, would be in a much better place. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura. Ms. Mitzi, it certainly makes a lot of sense and coheres very well with the point that Dr. Modena made about focus on critical infrastructure. It does seem to me also that under the previous administration and even before that, some of the roads that have been built in Zambia are not of particularly high quality, and even those that were built perhaps were not optimally constructed so as to connect people across different parts of the country. So certainly from a policy perspective, this seems to be a critical intervention. I'd like to bring the conversation back to a point that Vincent Obisiorlu made about the opportunities that Zambia has to tap into the global copper and cobalt supply chains, but also to connect the mining of those minerals and metals to the region more generally. I wonder if Dr. Modena, you could come in on this point and perhaps just articulate whether these opportunities to tap into global value chains are there, and whether this is a priority for the current Zambian government, and whether in fact this is a major point of debate. Your advice is very useful. Dr. Modena, apologies, it looks like you're still muted.
Hello?
Yeah, there we
Can
go.
you hear me? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So I am a trade economist, and I've really looked around the structure of Zambia's trade in both minerals, crops, and anything that you'd talk about that leaves the borders of Zambia. And I've had the privilege of working closely with both regional and local organizations in looking at how we could exploit the value chains that exist in terms of the minerals and also other products that we may have as a country. I think right now we've seen the president talking about having the regional sort of like a joint regional value chain in terms of batteries that takes into account the minerals, which are unique to our setting, cobalt, as well as others that are required with the Congo DR. And I'm aware of the ongoing discussions with the Zimbabwe, where we're trying to put a sort of processing zone for high value products production and export, which I think the current government has also been really positively looking forward to and is supporting. But when it comes to minerals like copper, one of the major things that becomes an issue is how do you add value to copper, and what is really copper used for? We have seen locally that there has been increased investment in terms of some basic copper products like copper wires, copper related products. But when it comes to those that are really, like when it comes really to increased value addition, it really is constrained by the fact that we have countries that really import this copper and use it for specific construction purposes like China. I can say that over 60-70% of our copper is actually destined for China, despite it going through like Switzerland. We find it going to China. And the Chinese would rather import this copper, use it at the point of their construction or indeed production to actually come up with the products that they really want. One way in which possibly the government could do is to see how they can then leverage to with those kinds of investors to create value chains which will encourage them to produce the goods from within the country and then export them out there to where they're supposed to be consumed. Within the region, we have, for example, huge amounts of copper that is reported go to South Africa. But if you look at the South African data set, you realize that that copper is not actually reported, which for me just speaks to the fact that South Africa is used as a transit point for the Zambian copper. Then how could we then leverage our industrial base if we are to use regional value chains in the mineral sector? One thing that we could look at is basically how we could partner with countries like South Africa, which has got a stronger industrial base. They could add value to some of our copper and then use the technology backwards to bring it back to Zambia, and then export more value-added products that would bring more employment to the country. And maybe beyond the copper itself, we, like Lola was talking about, the food industry. Improving productivity is quite critical. And not only improving productivities, but also the aggregators, the institutions that should be able to create the code rooms, the collection points, and promote the exports to the region and even within the country itself to supply. That will be very, very critical if we are to leverage the region for improved economic growth and improvement in the welfare of the people. And one thing that we rarely talk about is the issue of education. If you look at the Zambian statistics, an average Zambian has been in less than 12 years of education. Most of them, the majority, end at, say, a lower secondary school, which is grade 9. So with that level of population, education and skills, the question would be, what would you do with that level of skills that we have as a country? One thing that the current government has tried to do as a medium-term and long-term solution is to try to make education a free instrument that can be used to build the skills for the Zambians and try to see and ensure that possibly with improved skills, there would be room for innovation, for development, and for also looking into how we can improve the operation of the economy itself. I believe that with these kinds of movements and with the current, for example, high copper prices and the positive sentiments that are coming in, the government will just have to have a stronger voice and a more clear voice in how they will deal and resolve the issues, for example, in the mining sector. I would hasten to say, although we have heard the government policy saying they want to increase production to more than 1 million and even 3 million in the next by 2030. One of the things is that in the short term, we have all these lingering problems in the mining sector, which government has not really articulated very well as to how they are going to resolve them and how they hope that the entire new investments could fit in. And if they can do that, it would help unlock the investments that are really required, and then would indeed lead to maybe establishment of mining support industries as well as value-adding product industries in the copper value chains. We have a few initiatives, for example, multi-facet economic zones, that one of them is run by the Chinese, which is trying to add value to copper. And if the government can leverage on such and use those as means and basis of adding and tapping into the global value chains and regional value chains, it would be a very good idea. Thank you very much.
Amazing, Dr. Mudina. You paint an extraordinary picture there of the possibilities that are available. and the kind of policies that the Zambian government would be well advised to undertake. It seems to me, in fact, that if a number of these interventions were actually to materialize and the policy regime in both the minerals and agriculture sectors were to gain traction in the way that you suggest, that in fact an IMF bailout package may be less urgent. However, of course, the question is always one of speed. I'd like to at this point come back to Boniface Chembe. Mr. Chembe, if you wouldn't mind just elaborating on something you said in your initial intervention about how there are many commentators who talk about local solutions rather than IMF solutions, but these kind of lack substance. Are you of the view that some of the policy initiatives that Dr. Mudenda has articulated here could be some of those that could avoid an IMF bailout? Mr. Chembe, sorry, you're still on mute. Sorry.
I hope I'm audible now.
You are.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Ross. A quick answer to your question is yes. I think Dr. Mudenda has articulated very well some of the steps that we need to take as a country. But let me add to that. We have to start with the basic fundamentals. If you look at the Ministry of Mines, for example, in this country, it is one of the least funded ministries in the country that has got, yes, some expertise, but is in dire need of more qualified expertise possessing the right esoteric knowledge to be able to manage the mining industry in this country. So first and foremost, prioritizing the Ministry of Mines, ensuring that there is adequate financing to it, and from there, making sure that small-scale miners, for example, are taken care of in a much more constructive and sober manner, if you will, by way of either forming cooperatives that allows them to have a readily available market for their activities, and having them contribute much more aggressively to the tax base of the country. We don't have very well regulated small-scale mining sector, and the Ministry of Mines, if well funded, can regulate this sector and ensure that it provides the right revenue to the country. That is number one. Number two, if you look at the mining exploration landscape in Zambia, it is quite low. The U.S. Geological Survey estimates that Zambia, if it is to maximize its mining, still can manage about 20 million tons of copper, if you will, because right now we are only exploring between 40 to about 50% of the potential mining capacity that we have in Zambia. And if you look at that figure, it means that whatever resources that you are even realizing from the mining sector are very little. So if you broaden the exploration, the mining exploration potential, the mining of copper and other minerals in this country beyond the 3 billion tons that has been projected for the next 7 or 10 years or so, we would be in a position to start making much more money out of that, and of course ultimately ensure that we forego solutions such as the IMF bailout package. But of course, as you know, Ross, mining exploration requires or utilizes very expensive machinery. So we need to make sure that we put in place the right policies, the right incentives for those who want to take the risk to go into mining exploration, to be able to bring in this machinery at a fairly affordable prices and amounts, and ensure that they go about their businesses. These are some of the policy, some other policy initiatives that this country can take full advantage of and ensure that we benefit from the mineral sector much more extensively. But also allow me to just quickly touch on the agriculture sector in terms of why do we seemingly have food insecurity, which tends to be the case more or less on an annual basis. One of the things that the new Dawn government is now trying to do is to remove the bottlenecks, remove the difficulties that are there for those who want to go into farming to use irrigation. Most of our farming is rain-fed, and rain-fed farming is seasonal. And when you have seasonal farming, it means that you limit yourself on the amount of resources, one, that you can realize from farming, but also two, you limit yourself in terms of the amount of food that is readily available on the market. So the more food we have, the cheaper it becomes. But right now, what we are producing is not as much as we ought to produce, and it is contributing to the high prices of commodity prices, especially over an agricultural nature and so on and so forth. So there are certain policy directions that the new Dawn government has to be able to implement. And these are basic fundamental policies, first and foremost, before we even move into the policy direction that Dr. Mudenda was talking about. So take care of the fundamentals and then build on those, and ultimately ensure that you expand your resource base. And yes, I think if we do that, certainly it does contribute to the school of thought that believes that there are local solutions to the current debt problem that we are facing. But I couldn't agree more with your viewpoint. The issue is time. People are impatient, and they want to see things happen very quickly. I'm afraid sometimes that is not always possible, especially when you have to deal with a great deal of difficulties. And this is where the new Dawn government again has to be able to communicate very clearly and in no uncertain terms. There are some positives that have been scored. For example, as Dr. Mudenda rightfully put it, inflation rate has gone down from about 24% to about 11% right now. The GDP has improved from negative 3.5% to about positive 2.3%. The exchange rate between the kwacha and the dollar has more or less stabilized between 16, 17 kwacha, and at the very most 18 kwacha, and so on. So there's a bit of stability in that regard. You've got very good programs such as the Constituency Development Fund and its increase in its allocation, but also the kind of service delivery that it aims to bring about, especially at the community level and especially at growing community economies. So these are some of the small success stories that have to be explained and communicated to the people very clearly, and also inform them that, look, if we do A, B, C, D, we're going to move in this direction, so that you carry everybody with you on board. Anything short of that, again, as I stated in my initial opening remarks, it becomes problematic because people are impatient and people are hungry and people want quick solutions. So we have to talk to them and explain each step as we move, so that we carry everybody on board.
Indeed, Mr. Chairman, very, very compelling views. Thank you very much for sharing. One of the things that Dr. Chalwa had indicated when we did our 100-day assessment was that, in fact, the government could really have done with more consultative governance in respect of the right direction to take for the economy. And certainly a number of you have mentioned here today the importance of communicating that direction and what each intervention is expected to produce. One of the things you mentioned, Mr. Chamber, was the opportunity for increased exploration investment in Zambia's minerals and metals, which raises the question of whether side stream and upstream linkages could be formed in addition to potential downstream value addition that Dr. Modena was talking about. I'd like at this stage to turn the question to Vincent. Vincent, are you of the view that if some of these reforms that have been articulated here today were implemented, especially the low-hanging fruit, just like getting the policy regime right in respect of attracting exploration investment, that would perhaps stymie the need for an IMF bailout, or do you see the IMF bailout as a potentially positive thing for Zambia?
So I think first and foremost, I think the IMF bailout is going to have to happen in tandem with these other adjustments and movements towards things. I don't think that it's possible at this point in time to go back and look at what we can do differently to avoid an IMF bailout. Right now, Zambia is in a position with its debt where if it does not get a bailout from the IMF, it will be faced and confronted with severe defaults, as well as inflation returning and increasing and all of these things coming back. Now, the IMF bailout also gives and provides Zambia with some level of legitimacy in terms of the foreign markets and the view of how Zambia is going to approach the repayment of its Eurobonds. Remember, Zambia has a Eurobond that is due in 2 years. So the country will need some level of bailout and a restructuring of the debt. This is inevitable at this point in time. To Prof. Chawa's point previously from the previous webinar, yes, it could have been better done where the New Dawn government engaged in a more consultative process with the population on how they looked to approach it. But right now, at this present moment in time, the IMF bailout is the way forward. Now, I think that in addition to that, there are other additional mechanisms that can be used and pursued for debt restructuring in addition to IMF bailout. These include green bonds, which restructuring some of the debt to make room for green investment in the country and to help and assist the development of some of these side, mid, and downstream developments and value additions to not just the copper value supply chain, but also the agricultural supply chain and supply side, as well as the educational sector. Now, yes, Zambia stands to, in addition to copper value chain, to also benefit from the current Russia-Ukraine crisis as a result of it being a potential major agricultural player. This will require significant work, as has been mentioned by previous speakers, to work on how the government approaches agricultural policy, as well as approaches the climate risk factors. Now, we're missing the elephant in the room in this whole conversation. Climate change is coming. Climate change is real. This is not to fearmonger and make people alarmed. This is a reality we're facing all around the world, whether we like it or not. In South Africa, we've recently faced significant floods that are unprecedented in their history in KwaZulu-Natal. This can happen anywhere. Zambia will need to approach agriculture in a way that is sustainable, that does not create water depletion, and that is able to resist and manage some of the climatory factors that's going to be faced with. Whether we like it or not, this is going to happen. India and Pakistan are currently faced with severe heat waves. We cannot be avoiding this in any way, shape, or form. Now, at the same time, this climate disaster we're confronted with gives opportunities for Zambia's and how Zambia can approach debt restructuring in addition. Zambia can also pursue the potential nature for debt swap, which is basically in exchange for protection and preservation of natural ecosystems, of the natural environment, of wildlife, of of all these things. Zambia can say to the global community and say, look, Western countries, you have used most of your forests and wildlands in the name of progress and development. It's great. We have this debt issue that we're faced with. Work with us. Let us preserve some of this in exchange for you helping us to reduce our debt and approach and make sure that we can approach debt restructuring in an effective and healthy manner. Now, debt restructuring is going to require some sacrifices from the government, but it cannot be done in a manner, as Mr. Boniface has mentioned, that will significantly hamper and damage the average Zambian on the street. If that is to happen, there will be no support from the Zambian population on the approach and the pursuit of debt restructuring. Essential is communication in all of this. At the end of the day, the Zambian government cannot be continuing in engagements where they do not highlight and explain not only that this is going to happen and this needs to happen, but also what the benefits are, right, and the cost of it not happening, but also framing and presenting debt restructuring and the necessary structural changes and structural transformations as something positive. And not only framing it as something positive, but also executing in a positive and effective manner, right? You cannot say, we're going to debt restructure and this will require us to scale back on some of our ambitions, but it's going to be only that. No, you have to state that we're going to do this. This is going to be the cost, and these are going to be the benefits in the long term. Make the people understand and see what the long-term benefits are, without which there's no reason for them to buy on. There's no reason for them to continue to support the New Dawn government and its ambitions. Lastly, to come back to Mr. Boniface's recent point about the mining industry and license allocation, Zambia recently stopped the allocation of new licenses for a while because of how much of a mess that department and that whole process was. Now, Zambia is going to need to further explore how to make this system not only streamline it, but also make it efficient. Address and approach companies who are not pursuing best practice in terms of licenses, but also make sure that rules are put in place, rules and policies are put in place that keep and hold things to a standard that all companies will be forced to play by, and companies who are not playing by these standards will be punished, not just by the government and regulatory frameworks, but will also be punished by the investor community. This is where environmental, social, and governance will come into play a role. Yes, President Hichilema is looking to incorporate ESG criteria and ESG integration into the mining industry for how for the opportunities it gives for foreign investment. But it also is essential for helping to support existing regulatory frameworks in Zambia, from licensing to how mining companies approach and manage labor and workers. Look, education for Zambia to effectively be able to manage the policy of free education that the New Dawn government wants to approach and pursue, there needs to be revenues and money in the bank.
Gotcha.
The current situation without an IMF bailout will result in more of the usual. It will result in a lack of investment in infrastructure that is critical. And without critical infrastructure, we cannot, as Ms. Miti has pointed out, connect the region in Zambia that is rich and has significant harvests of rice with the community down the road or somewhere not too far from it that is struggling with rice production. We will not be able to make these value chains and expand into these value chains that are necessary for the development of these exports, finished goods, downside and upstream beneficiation and development of these products, both in the agricultural sector and the mining and copper sectors. So that's essential.
Gotcha. Vincent, thank you very much. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. You now know what to expect in the contents of the policy briefing that Vincent has been working on and that we will be releasing in the next couple of weeks. Strong views there, and in fact, critical point is that the interventions that have been articulated here today as critical for Zambia are not necessarily mutually exclusive to an IMF bailout, which in the end helps to soften the blow and the current opportunity costs associated with servicing debt and the interest on that debt. Moreover, it's likely to give Zambia credibility with rating agencies, which, whether we like it or not, are particularly powerful. So crucial intervention there. Everybody on the panel today has mentioned the importance of communication and really bringing ordinary citizens on board with what can often seem like very complex and technical matters. And in that respect, I expect that the New Dawn government, that the Hichilema administration will be hiring all of you as communication consultants to express the critical order in which things need to happen. The low-hanging fruit, the policy interventions that are required right from the outset through to some of the more sophisticated plans. So on that note, and because we're running out of time, I'd like to hand over to each of our speakers just for their closing remarks. And Ms. Mitsi, perhaps if you could kick us off in that respect, and especially focusing on communication for ordinary citizens. What is the sense on the ground? You know, you've been quite articulate in how you've mentioned the issues of hunger and impatience and rising prices on the street. How do you think the government could do better, and how could civil society really hold the government to account? And while the focus is on the economy, also not neglect some of the other factors that you mentioned about strengthening democracy and preventing it from any future backsliding, given what had happened in the run-up to last year's elections. Laura, over to you, ma'am.
Yeah, so I think to close out, say it's like that communication is more important at this time than communication is always important. Politics is about PR, is about especially sometimes selling citizens pie in the sky. But in this case, we're not talking about pie in the sky. It's a case of a government that needs to take the people into its confidence and trust their intelligence, trust their ability to understand how difficult things are. It's a miracle turnover or change of things is impossible right now. So even issues like the IMF, I think could have been articulated better. You know, like Vincent was saying, we don't really have a choice. We never did have a choice with the IMF because of the huge debt we had that is held with all these creditors who will only give us breathing space with the IMF on board. So it's not as if we were not of strength. We've always been negotiating from a weak position. And without the IMF, without us being able to fight, to have the trust of the investors, the trust of the creditors, we're always going backwards. That is not something very difficult to explain to citizens. So you use everyday explanations. If you, as a family, you have you've tied yourself up in debt, you've got to deal with your creditors before you can take money to everyday needs in the family. So I would say again that the new government is very weak in communication, even when it's doing well in certain matters. So I would also say that the issue of democracy is huge. We must not neglect it. Neither must we believe that things will resolve themselves, because we do not 10 years from now to have maybe made economic improvements that are just taken backwards again, because you're back where you have these issues that took us so many steps backwards. We need a government that fears the people, a government that knows that whatever it does must benefit citizens. And I'll end again by reiterating that unless ordinary citizens can have their daily lives improved, it's no use any other changes. It's not paper improvements. And
oh dear, unfortunately, connectivity has exited Laura at a very inopportune time. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to hand over to you for your brief closing remarks. We have a comment from the floor that essentially disagrees with our view that an IMF bailout is necessary. Chris Njamba says IMF bailout is not a solution. The alternative to a bailout is to increase revenue by taxing the rich, the mines, and a fat tax on the corporate world. Perhaps you could incorporate that in your closing remarks. In fact, sorry, I've just seen that Laura has managed to rejoin us. So I'll come to you now in a second, Mr. Chembe. But Laura, apologies, you got cut off from us, but I did want to give you a minute to close out. You were right in the middle of talking about allowing democratic backsliding.
Yes, so I was saying that we must be careful not to allow democratic backsliding because a democracy, economic improvement in a country in which people are fearful, again, is still not a wholesome improvement of citizen lives. So we want citizen lives who live in a democracy, but citizen lives as well that benefit from the economy, benefit from copper, benefit from everything that, all the resources that the country has. And for now, I am really hoping that, that for once, if we do have economic benefits, they will benefit the people at the bottom. Under MMD a few years ago, we had really fantastic figures, growth at 7%. Investors were running to Zambia. It looked wonderful, but people still did not have water. Feeder roads were still not being graded. So the kind of economic improvement we are looking for at the ACN now is one that benefits the majority citizens, not only the few people in Lusaka. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Laura, thank you so very much. And again, just re-emphasizing the point that development needs to be broad-based. You can have good GDP growth figures, but unless it is benefiting a vast majority of the population, it may end up proving relatively fruitless. So thank you for your interventions and your participation today. Highly appreciated. Mr. Chembe, over to you. Mr. Chembe, my apologies. It looks like you're still muted.
All right. Thank you so very much again, once again, Ross. Thank you very much to GGA, but also the Mail and Guardian for an opportunity for us to share our thoughts on this very important subject matter. Allow me to start with the comment by Chris Njamba. I understand the many frustrations that people may have against the IMF, especially if you look at their track record on the African continent. But in the context of Zambia and in the interest of ensuring that the country is brought back on its normal economic path or trajectory, and thereafter implement what Mr. Jamba is talking about, that is increasing the tax for the rich and then also increasing tax on the corporate world. Those are things that can come into play after the economy has been stabilized. We certainly need restructuring, and we do need some kind of external assistance at the moment. And yes, it is not a popular decision. And I think one of the things that this new Dawn government perhaps has to be credited for so far is that they have done some things that are not very popular and that makes them a bit unpopular. For example, going for the IMF bailout package, removing cadres from the streets, ensuring that issues of the environment are addressed by banning charcoal burning, as it were. That's a policy direction that is in the process. These are some of the most important things that the country needs to do. They may not be popular, but they may be the right things to do. And we need a government that is prepared to even lose a vote by way of doing the right thing. And I think we must be able to point out that if it does the country some good. The second issue that I would like to quickly address is that one of the biggest sources of conflict in the mining industry in Zambia has been the prices of electricity or power supply from ZESCO or power supply companies to the mining companies. This has been as a result of the cost of service study not having been availed to stakeholders. Mining companies tend to dispute the amount of money that they have to pay for power supply, and this has tended to be a very serious source of friction. So we would want to appeal that there is need to ensure that there is much more transparency and independence, as well as accountability on the part of the power supply companies to the mines, by ensuring that the cost of service study is released, and that whenever negotiations are taking place on how much it will cost to supply power, that this is done in a transparent manner that is informed to all citizens of this country, so that perceptions, right or wrong, of corruption, of the people of Zambia being cheated out of their own resources are addressed, and that the friction that this tends to bring about the mining sector, and thereby slow down progress or development is also stopped. Otherwise, it is an issue of people having to be patient. The government has to explain to the people. They have to carry on board everyone, and I think if they do that, it will go a long way in releasing or at least arresting some of the anxieties that people may have around issues of unemployment, poverty, but most pressing the high cost of living in this country.
Brilliant final thoughts there. And indeed, again, just giving expression to this view that an IMF bailout is not inimical to or mutually exclusive from being able to implement some of the policy interventions that have been articulated here today. And indeed, the need for a government that is willing to do hard things but communicate well about that, and certainly needs to work harder at ensuring transparency and accountability in the mining sector, especially, which obviously has a fraught history and clearly still today is causing consternation and conflict. Mr. Chembe, thank you very much. On that note of interventions, I was just about to hand over to Dr. Modende to close us out, but in the interest of time, Vincent Obisi-Orlu from GGA, if I could give you the last word. Vincent, would you mind giving us 1 minute, and then I'll hand over to Dr. Modende to close us out.
Not a problem, Ross. Let me just start by saying that, look, to say that the IMF bailout is not the solution and the alternative is just tax the rich and the mining companies and let them share the profits, it misses the fact that debt servicing costs in Zambia are really high. Without an IMF bailout, the governments will continue to pay these high debt servicing costs. An IMF bailout is essential to reduce and find a way to move towards a more healthy way of engaging with the debt. Second, without a way to stem borrowing in Zambia by the government, we will not be able to address these issues. Within 5 years' time, I can guarantee you, if we do not get Zambia's debt habits, as some have called it, under control, we will be back in this situation space, seeking an IMF bailout with what is considered a proverbial begging bowl. Look, is an avenue and a way for us to find a solution to the current problem. This does not reduce or exclude any of the other ways to approach and fix the challenges and approach fixing the challenges facing Zambia. Having an IMF bailout, a successful IMF bailout, and my hope, my prayer is that as Zambia continues, as the Zambian Ministry of Finance continues to engage with the IMF, as they continue to speak to the debt, to those they owe money, the government owes money. As this continues, I pray and hope that the Zambian government is able to not only make an agreement, an accord with them that reduces debt servicing costs, but also come to an understanding in a place where within the legislation, the government is able to place an important rule of how money is borrowed, how and what money is used for. Keep in mind, Zambia owes and is due to pay a $1 billion Eurobond in September of this year. Zambia is also due to pay a series of Eurobonds between now and 2026. If debt servicing is not managed, these debts that are currently in the progress of being paid will not be able to be paid, and the cost of borrowing will increase significantly greater. So, communication, as everyone has pointed out, is key and central, and is so important in how the government is approaching and moves towards the future of Zambia. Without effective communication, without a way to ensure that development is broad-based, without a way to ensure that the people know why we're facing these challenges, without these, none of the things we've articulated here, none of what our ambitions and our hopes and prayers and dreams for the future of Zambia are, will be realized effectively. So if I could say anything to the Hichilema administration, please communicate better to the people. It is essential that you communicate to the people as a matter of priority, both in terms of what an IMF bailout means, as well as what is needed to make your economy high-performing, stable, sustainable, and to potentially become a power within the region that benefits and does not suffer all of the adverse consequences of the challenges we're faced with in the future. Thank you.
Very good. Terrific intervention there. Thank you for your final thoughts, Vincent. I'd like to hand over to Dr. Modende for your final words. Unfortunately, we've run over time, so just a closing minute, if you would. Thank you, Dr. Modende. Dr. Modende, I think that you are still on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'll be quite quick. My closing remarks are basically one, that possibly the new government has brought in some sort of hope in the business community, and has so far generated some sort of confidence, which is essential for triggering investment as well as, build up the country. My strong belief is also that the IMF bailout itself, like it has already been said by the previous speakers, has actually been essential, and it's going to be catalytic in terms of generating both investments, especially in key sectors of the economy, such as the mines, even agriculture itself. With that said, I just want to say that the government just has right now an opportunity to leverage on the IMF bailout in terms of consolidating and undertaking further structural reforms that will bring the mining industry, the agriculture sector, the tourism sector, and even the ICT sectors that are growing into one sort of component that will be used to leverage the growth of the economy and lead to poverty reduction. In the short term, the stabilization is critical, and therefore the pursuit of tight monetary policy, as well as the need for the bailout itself, cannot be debated. We need it, and we need that to be accompanied by the consolidation of the other sectors that are critical to generating revenue and expanding the sources of government revenue to actually reduce this.
Looks as if we've lost Dr. Modende again, unfortunately. Just
or giving the support to our ministry that has been doing it on our behalf, that actually would not generate a different result. We can't tax the mines, we can't tax the companies. If you check the last 5 years or so, 2 of the key major mines are under government control. They are chaotically organized. We can't leverage anything from the increasing copper mines. So we need a government that will look and give a policy direction that is strong and improve the environment for business and investment. Thank you very much for those few remarks. I wish to appreciate you inviting me to participate in this webinar. Thanks.
Dr. Modenda, I'm very pleased that we were able to get you on board. To yourself, Mufmiti, Gembe, Vincent, Obisi Orlu, thank you so much. It gives us great confidence that there are people in Zambia who have such brilliant views regarding what can and should be done, and to see the level of coherence and unity, in fact, across all speakers. And of course, we wish you all the best. We'll be continuing these dialogues and, of course, engaging on policy recommendations that are optimal for Zambia's future. Thank you, everyone, for having joined us today. We really do appreciate your time, and we look forward to our next engagement. Many, many thanks to the Mail and Guardian for hosting us as well. Have a great evening.
Plato said, "Who will guard the guardians? Who will guard the guardians? Who are our guardians? Are they accountable for their actions, or are they accountable for their actions? Who elects these guardians? Us, them, someone else? And if they guard us, who will guard them? Who will guard the guardians? The Mail and Guardian, if you really want to know." If you really want to know.